Are you tired of your valuable ideas and suggestions getting lost in the shuffle? Well, that is why I'm introducing Direct Suggest, the revolutionary digital suggestion box that puts your voice front and center. With Direct Suggest, you have the power to make a difference in your organization. Direct Suggest provides value to organizations in various industries worldwide, including notable brands like Comcast, TD Bank, and Nokia. And here's the best part. Direct Suggest only costs 50 cents per employee per month, making it an affordable solution for businesses of all sizes. Plus, they have an incredibly high ROI and savings potential with an average 33 times return on investment. The implementation process is also a breeze. Once committed, setting up Direct Suggest from start to finish can be completed in as quickly as a week or less. Don't let your ideas or your team's ideas go unnoticed. Visit directsuggest.com today and start by making a difference with Direct Suggest. Use the promo code HUMANHR for your extended 60-day free trial. Again, visit directsuggest.com to learn more, and remember to use promo code HUMANHR for an extended free trial. Direct Suggest, where your voice matters. Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode. And, this week we're going to be talking about owning your uniqueness and your past, but also how we can apply transferable skills or actually transfer our skills to a new career. So we're going to kind of touch on everything, or a lot of everything. So to do that, I have a wonderful guest with me this week, Carrington Smith Trabue, also known as Carrie to her friends and colleagues, who is the founder and president of Carrington Legal Search and best-selling author of Blooming. A lawyer by training, Carrie left her litigation practice in 2000 to pursue her passion for connecting people. Over the last 20 years, Carrie has become the trusted search partner to a host of Fortune 500 companies, venture-backed startups, and AMLAW 100 law firms. Her executive search experience focuses primarily on legal and compliance searches in the financial services and technology verticals, but at the request of her clients has expanded to include searches for other executive roles as well. Her law firm partner search experience includes office openings, expansions, groups, and individual partner moves. Carrie has interviewed thousands of executives, routinely asking them, "We've all have moments in life that define us. Please tell me about a moment that shaped you and how it did." And during the pandemic, Carrie authored Blooming as her answer to this question and her effort to help anyone who is struggling in life or career. So that is why we're going to be touching on all of these amazing topics today. Carrie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Tracy.
Of course. So, it definitely goes without saying that you coming from a legal background, have shifted your experience and your skills to a new, almost like a new career, a new journey, which is obviously something that we definitely want to dive into today. What led you there? Like, how did you go from having, a career that took a ton of years of schooling and all of this background to then deciding that you were going to become an author and coach executives and interview them?
Yeah, well, I think that when we start out going to college and kind of deciding what our career is going to be, a lot of times it's based on our family's expectations. And we kind of, I know myself, I thought I only had a couple of options, and that was to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer, or a banker. Like I didn't think there were any other jobs out there. I hadn't been exposed to any of them. So I decided I was going to go to law school, and definitely it was a good fit for me in some ways. I definitely enjoy interacting with lawyers. I really love the stimulating intellectual conversations and things like that. But what I didn't have an understanding of was how grueling that career is and how hard. You go through all that schooling, but then once you start working, you work. When I was trying cases, I sometimes was working 20 hours a day. You'd go to court, then you'd come back and you'd prepare for the next day, and you'd catch a few hours of sleep before you got up and started again. And it got to the point where my friends sort of forgot about me. They're like, she's not around. I was always working. So there was very little satisfaction in life. And I reached a point where I I wanted to use my law degree still, and I knew I wanted to make a career change, but I didn't know what that was going to look like. And so I bought this book called What Color is Your Parachute? And it's still out there. They do a new version every couple of years, and it provides you with a lot of tests that you can take and some self-evaluation that you can do. And I came to realize that there were other options out there that were a much better fit for me and my personality. And so I tried to figure out how I could use that law degree and marry it with the skills and maybe the path I really should have taken from the beginning. And so that's how I ended up doing legal executive search. I was able to continue to interact with lawyers. I was on the board of different bar associations and had a lot of really worked that network. And I was able to leverage that network and leverage that law degree and move into something that was a much better fit for me. And also, it was a much better fit for the lifestyle that I wanted. A lot more freedom to, conduct my day as I wished and not be, bound to the client's demands and things like that. So that was my journey there.
No, that's super interesting. And, I'm sure that being in litigation, at least as far as I know, litigation is one of the more grueling specialties within law. And so it's interesting to hear about how you identified at that point that you were not happy with the career that you chose or the demands that it had on you, and you were able to repurpose the skills that you did acquire, because that's really what transferring skills is all about. And I get so many questions from listeners on how to do that, especially from people who are trying to break into HR, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and it's interesting. Once I identified that that was what I wanted to do, then I decided there weren't any opportunities to do it actually. So I had to reach out to national headhunting firms and say, hey, you need to open an Austin office. And so that's what I did. And that's how I got my first opportunity, was by cold calling these companies and saying, you know what, you need to have an Austin office. And the second company I called, the guy said, well, you closed me in the first 5 minutes. So if I don't hire you, somebody else does. So we need to do this.
Nice.
Yeah. And that's how that journey began. So,
wow. Fast forwarding a little bit, about 20 years or so, because this was, if I can remember your bio correctly, this was back in 2000. But, when we think about 2020, obviously COVID is the first thing that comes to mind. And this reckoning happened. We know this, where people were confronted with what they are doing, what they want to be doing, how they want to spend their time, how they aren't spending their time. And a lot of people also went through, obviously a lot of trauma, whether it was themselves or their loved ones experiencing loss or difficulty from contracting COVID, to people then losing their jobs. Like, there was so much that happened during COVID. And so, shifting gears a little bit, how have you seen COVID have an influence on this shifting of careers and transferring of skill sets and skills, and even like the blurring of lines between our personal and professional lives?
well, that's how it was before COVID. I mean, that's how my generation, I'm Gen X, that's how I was raised. But now, post Zoom, the two have merged. And so now we're able to see people more holistically. And I don't think that there's any going back from that. So now people understand that there are childcare needs, and they know about some of the sort of baggage that people didn't really want to know about in the past, but you can't unsee it. And so it's absolutely changed the way people approach, or how employers approach how they're dealing with employees and how they're interacting with them, and just trying to sort of meet them where they are. Now, more recently, we're starting to see more people pushing to go back to the office. but a lot of people are dragging their feet because they found that they were able to have a lifestyle where they were able to like see their kids when they came home from school and interact with, their spouse on a more regular basis.
Right.
And, so those were positive things that nobody wants to give up, and that's understandable.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about this a lot on the podcast, that, this idea that the workplace has changed so much. And yet employees are still in this position to be able to demand and expect certain things from their employers. I mean, the quote unquote war for talent remains. Retention is typically the number one challenge, and turnover is the number one challenge for most businesses. And so when I hear about companies saying, okay, well, everyone's going to come back to work because that's how we're going to drive productivity, it always leads me to question, well, were you unproductive during COVID? Because most businesses made a lot of money. Most businesses did pretty well during COVID, and employees who were able to work remotely were much happier, overall. Of course, there's always the group of people who don't really like to work remotely, and that's okay. There's a company out there for them that doesn't want them to work remotely anyway. But it definitely, I always think about, well, how will the world continue to react to this changing environment?
Well, it's interesting because I think that there's been a bit of a shift. There's been some drop in productivity for people that work remotely. Yeah. And so in the legal profession, it's very much, you grow up through, you start out as an associate and then you are elevated to be a partner. And it's those mid-level associates that are so critical. And those are the ones that haven't been necessarily properly developed. And we're starting to see the consequences of that.
I don't know if this is playing devil's advocate or if you maybe have more context on this, but my initial thought there is that it's not necessarily an issue of being remote, but rather an issue of prioritizing training and development. Because when I think about, this issue, there have been companies that have had employees who have been remote before COVID, and they were able to, grow within their careers and receive training. So is the emphasis, or should the emphasis be on businesses needing to reinvest in training and development? Or is it really that the remote work is the enemy of training and development here?
That's a good question. I mean, you're right. Some businesses have been incredibly successful having a remote workforce for years. I think that it's really has a lot to do with lawyers in general and how they are trained. And a lot of that training just comes from mentorship and working, on a daily basis and having that daily interaction of just talking through issues that happens more at the water cooler or walking into someone's office. And if you're just doing a bunch of Zoom calls, you just don't get that same level of exposure to the type of training that happens when you're being mentored. So I think that's really a big part of it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I think about the HR world, and there's definitely a realization that during COVID, the roles that were eliminated within the industry, within HR specifically, were like training, learning, and development roles. And so to me, it's not surprising to hear your, perspective on this. Although I'm curious to know if there is an HR presence in law firms at all, because I know of many that don't have HR support. And so on that, taking that into consideration, like, again, coming back to what HR leaders experience, it's really, I see at least the repercussions of removing or cutting those roles, because now we have almost 4 years later, by the time this episode comes out, we have this issue where people are not experiencing or receiving the training and the development that they need. So on that, like, can you share with us a little bit, do law firms have HR leaders? Is there an HR presence? Does it depend on the firm? I'm sure there are listeners out there that work in the legal space, but it would be interesting to hear.
Well, they have they have people that handle recruiting. They do have like an HR person, but it's not the same as in major corporations. They don't have people that really, a few firms have a person that may focus on training and development, but really that's not an emphasis. They don't have that same level of HR presence as you see in companies at all.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's something for us to reflect on as far as like how COVID has blurred these lines, because so many HR folks have had to also take on more. I mean, someone with my background in HR, for example, is not, accustomed to doing recruiting on a major scale. It's usually, you're involved in the recruitment process here and there, but not necessarily really owning that process. So I could see how just in general the lines have blurred. And then kind of reflecting on what you had shared earlier about how you had these experiences where you're seeing so much of someone's personal life. And it's true. I mean, every line was blurred. We're now zooming in and out of bedrooms and with spouses nearby and all of this stuff, that everything being blurred can also result in maybe some challenges with remote work. I mean, I think that remote work works best when the person working remotely is the person that should be working remotely, meaning there are people who are not really well suited for working remotely, whether they need to be in an office to feel motivated or they need to be around people, whatever that might be. That could be a reflection of how productivity may have changed. But I also see on the other side of things how, kind of to your point that you had made before, having the flexibility that remote work provides can also drive productivity. So it'll be interesting to see how all of that evolves.
I agree. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, obviously, remote work is something that we can't undo. It's really an advantage a lot of times as far as recruiting top talent. I've actually kind of wondered, like, how are the relocation businesses doing? Because I mean, a lot of executives are like, well, I'm not moving, and if you want me, you got to let me work remotely. And
right.
So there's definitely a lot less corporate relocations happening. That's definitely been a consequence of COVID. And it's definitely a recruiting tool to say, you're right, we want you so much, we'll let you work remotely. Right. But, there's definitely something about having that personal interaction. And it's so critical just to developing the culture of the firm or company, and developing the talent. So, and I 100% agree with you that some people are well suited to work remotely and others aren't. I mean, some of the reasons they may want to work remotely because they have small children, maybe the very thing that, lowers their productivity because they're not able to get that constructive, focused time to devote to work. So,
right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve. I mean, there are so many, there's so much research, I should say, that's happening as we speak to investigate this and try and understand a little bit better how remote work impacts productivity, whether positive or negatively. Shifting gears a little bit, one of the things that we definitely wanted to touch on today was this idea of celebrating your uniqueness and owning your past. So what does that mean to you? What does it mean to celebrate uniqueness and to really owning your past? What does that mean?
Well, this goes in line with the blending of the personal and professional. And I think for years I was very focused on fitting in. And I think that's what society teaches us, is that, we're supposed to fit in. And if we don't fit in, then there are consequences. So I spent much of my life, trying to fit in with the other moms, professionally as an attorney, fitting in with other attorneys. And I, it started, I guess, obviously with the career change, but I came to realize that the things that made me unique were the things that also made me successful. And I needed to celebrate and embrace those things as opposed to trying to mute them to try to fit in. And so, when you stand out, you become a target because you're not blending in with the group. But the thing is that, standing out and celebrating what really makes you unique is also what's going to drive your success, generally speaking. So, that's something that I really encourage people to do, is spend time figuring out, what is it that makes them special, and what are their top qualities, and to celebrate and try to utilize those as opposed to just trying to fit in and blend in with the crowd.
That's great advice, and it's great insight too, because it's really true when we think about how the personal and the professional have been blended. I always say that, gone are the days where you check your luggage, check your baggage at the door, so to speak, and work became this place, right, where you really became more vulnerable with your colleagues. You let people in, so to speak, in a way that had not really been done before, maybe in some environments and some cultures, but realistically, COVID kind of just totally took all of those walls away. And now we're in an environment, or in, the workplace has shifted to a space where most environments have adjusted to remain this way, where, people should be celebrating who they are, and should celebrate others for who they are. And people in general, especially, we're seeing this as Gen Z, starts to take on more of the market share, so to speak, in the workplace, where this idea of like, this is who I am, this is what I want, this is what I need, unapologetically becomes.
It is. It really is. I mean, you definitely see that with Gen Z. It's in stark contrast to the baby boomers, for instance. And we're, in the legal field, we're definitely seeing how the baby boomers being unwilling to retire is negatively impacting our workforce, because they don't understand the Gen Zers, and they're not able to adjust to their needs. And it's definitely causing some stress in the legal profession, for sure.
That's interesting. So is it that they're not retiring because they don't want to? Is it an economic thing? And I mean, at some point, I would imagine that probably in the next few years, Gen Z is going to be the majority of the workforce, even if others don't retire.
Yeah.
But where is that coming from?
It's a lot of things. But lawyers are staying and working longer. And so, we have lawyers in their 70s out there that are still going strong and not retiring. And the problem is that they don't understand that millennials even, but Gen Z in particular. And so they're insisting that certain standards, and how training and development, how people spend time in the office, how, just all the changes and the adjustments to, as you said, being unapologetically, who they are. Boomers were, just as I was saying, you don't bring your personal life to work, and you work really hard and long hours. And this whole idea of having a personal life was sort of foreign to them. They kind of didn't have one. And so the demand for having a personal life and having, being able to travel and have other, working to live as opposed to living to work. I mean, it's just a whole different mindset.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how things continue to evolve. It'll just be interesting to see how that there will be potentially a major shift in the workforce and the workplace once millennials and Gen Z take on these leadership roles that were otherwise occupied by those who will, by that point, likely be retired.
Well, so what's happening in the legal profession is that people are leaving earlier because they are not given the flexibility they're looking for because the boomers aren't letting them have it. So they're leaving the legal profession entirely.
Wow.
So what we're experiencing is a gap of the leaders we need. So when the boomers do retire, they are there.
Interesting.
So this is really like this is a crisis. Is how I would put it.
Right, because
so it's not like.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's not like the leaders will be there. They're disappearing. They're not there. They're leaving. So it's really going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. Do you have any predictions?
I don't. I mean, this is definitely something that, I mean, one of the issues with the legal profession anyway is that they aren't as business savvy, and they don't tend to use a lot of the business principles and how they run their business, and so they tend to be more like what's going to get them more money sooner. And so they don't tend to invest long term and think, okay, if we need to make these changes for succession planning purposes. I mean, succession planning is something that's so important in most businesses, but in the legal profession, it's not something that's really given serious consideration.
That's interesting. I guess we'll have to stay tuned to see how all of these changes pan out and what happens.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for all of your insights and for sharing your perspective today on the podcast. Where can all of the listeners connect with you and learn more about what you do and also read your book?
Yeah. So my website is carringtonlegal.com. My personal website where you can find the book is carrington-smith.com. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn and on Instagram and places like that. And there it's Carrington ATX.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for your time and for all of your insights. I guess we'll have to wait a few years to see how all of this pans out.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see myself.
Right. Stay tuned, everybody.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.